Good morning, everybody, and welcome along to this edition of LiR Confidential on lirmedia.tv. Our email, as usual, is info@lirmedia.tv. Now, it's not often we get a broadcast legend in the studio with us, but we have one this morning. Hale and hearty. Good morning, Alf McCarthy.
Well, good morning to you, Pat Barry. How are you?
And you know something? People may not know you to see, but when they'll hear that voice, they will recognize. I'll just have a quotation here to start this off, Alf. Alf McCarthy's honey-coated voice was one of the most recognized in RTE Radio 1. For more than 3 decades, he dominated our radio waves with his positive energy and deep-rooted knowledge. She didn't take any liberties there, Alf, did she? That's Linda Kinney in the Echo.
Well, I mean, I'm very humbled by what Linda wrote. I mean, that's a lovely, lovely quotation. When I wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, I don't see the honey-coated guy, you know, the honey-voiced guy. But it's lovely to hear that. Thank you.
And could we just start off? I mean, I empathize with you because I was a civil servant and I had to retire at 65. I had no choice. I had to retire, go out the door, even though I felt healthy and well able to work and all of that. And I think the same emotion was with you yourself, Alf, when it came to 65. Well, as you said, dims are the rules. But nevertheless, it was a huge challenge to you, was it?
It certainly was. Because I was staff in RTE, as you say, like being a civil servant, when you reach 65, you have to retire. I felt that what I did for a living was somewhat different in that I was doing Late Date at the time,
yes,
a program which I loved, late night radio, very intimate. And the audience was building beautifully, not only in Ireland, but around the world, very much like yourselves with LiR TV, that you're reaching out to the diaspora. And I would, on occasion, have a guy going to work in Hong Kong. I would have a guy going home in the evening in New York City, and a fella having his lunch in San Francisco, and everywhere else in between, all at the same time, as well as talking to people around the country and in Britain. And to me, that was like, wow. And the audience was building nicely. And I looked on the show, not so much as a record show, which is what it is, but it became something else. It became like a family, the Late Date family. And people tuned in and would listen in to find out how Pat Barry's doing, for example, because Pat would text in and say, listen, I'm down in Limerick or I'm over in Mallow. This is what I'm doing. And people would hold on to that. So I went to RT and I said, lads, with all due respect, I really don't want to retire at 65. And I was told, oh, well, it's not me now. I'm not doing this. It's them over there. In other words, HR, the wonderful great villain of every corporation. It's HR. So the funny thing about it is that my birthday is in November. In November, my birthday is. And they said to me, would you like to work to the end of the year? And I said, oh, yes, please. Now, because I was 65, staff, I finished as a staffer on my birthday, and then they gave me a contract to run to the end of the year. And I said, lads, this is very simple. Extend the contract. But unfortunately, they didn't want to do that. And therefore, I had to bite the bullet and say, well, because I still have loads of programs within me that I want to do, you know?
Absolutely, and radio is that medium. I'm trying to grapple myself because I've been involved in community radios up and down the country for years, and I'm trying to grapple with the visuals, if you know what I mean. But you did both, Alf, in your life. You did both television and radio, so you'll be well used to that. But I'm trying to get used to looking at the camera rather than looking down. You're on the radio, it doesn't matter where you look because you're on the radio. Like, it doesn't really matter. You could be lying down on the ground on the radio. But you followed, of course, people like Val Joyce. Well, didn't Val Joyce do Late Date? Do you remember Val Joyce?
I do indeed. In fact, I used to do a program from the Cork studios RT Radio 1 would finish at sort of 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
So there was a gap between 2 in the morning and 6 in the morning when RT came back on again. So in the Cork studios, we took that slot, and then we started producing edited highlights from the day before from RT's broadcast kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we were doing it live.
Right.
It's now all automated, and I think they go to music now actually at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I was doing that for a while, but at about sort of about 11:45, I would link up with Val every night to tell him what the menu was on the show.
Yeah.
And I found one night I found this clip going way back, and it was for the Irish Hospital sweepstakes. Do you remember them?
I do.
And the voice says, "And now get your ticket for the Irish Hospital sweepstakes." And it was Val Joyce. It was actually Val Joyce, but very, very British and blah blah, because that was the way the voices were on radio at that particular time.
Yeah.
And I played the clip for Val, and I said to him, "Do you know who that is?" And there was dead silence. He didn't respond. He knew exactly who it was himself.
Of course he did.
And then he says, "Oh, yeah, right. Well, Alf will be here later on." And it took about 2 weeks for him to thaw out after that when I used to hand over to him.
Yeah.
But it was, I loved Val, a lovely broadcaster, lovely voice for late night radio. And yeah, he was one of the greats.
Now, before we go on, Alf, you, of course, you 4 in your family, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, was it?
That's right. And a brother and 2 sisters.
Yeah, right. And you grew up in Ballinlough, of course, city.
That's right.
And you, for people who
Ballinlough, in the south side of Cork City.
That's all right too, because I hung around the north
parish. All right. Okay. Yeah. The parish I was in was called the Parish of Our Lady of Lourdes, and the place I lived in was called Pictuger Park. Now, how about that?
Oh,
Pictuger Park.
I'd forgotten about it.
Pardon me?
I'd forgotten about that Pictuger. It always intrigued me how it got its name.
Well, I'll tell you exactly how it got its name. I went to Sullivan's Quay School, which was a Christian Brothers school, after I did the first Holy Communion in Ballinlough, then went to Sullivan's Quay for the next few years before secondary. And all the lads, most of the lads there were like from Ballyfihan and Toker. And in those areas, you had places like, Pierce Road and Kent Road and Connolly Road. You know where I'm going with all of this.
I know.
And then they'd say to me, "And where are you from?" And I'd say, "I'm from Pictuger Park." And you get the crap beaten out of you. until I said to them, "No, lads, steady on, because Pictuger Park, Pictuger is the place in Lourdes where apparently Our Lady appeared. So that's where it's got its name from. So there's a place in Lourdes called Pictuger, and it's probably pronounced Pictuger or whatever. So then they forgave me because it had divine connotations,
So you were blessed.
That's where I grew up.
So you were blessed growing up.
Right? I was doubly blessed.
Your dad was a stonemason and a well-known musician for people around Cork and there, Buddy Mac.
Wasn't he?
Yeah. And
yeah.
You didn't follow into building walls.
Well, the family business, which was based in Copley Street in Cork, that's just off Anglesey Street. You know where the guard stations?
I do, yeah.
And they had a stone yard there, and my uncles worked there. And I never knew my grandfather had died before I was born.
Right.
But 2 of my uncles and my dad worked there.
Yeah.
But also they had a place down on Union Quay. If you're familiar with Union Quay, you have the School of Music building, and on the other side then you have the red bricked car park. In between the School of Music building and the car park is this lovely red stoned frontage, and that was where my dad and family had. They used to store cement and lime and stuff like that for working on stone.
Yeah.
And up in the attic, they used to clean that out, and that became known as Mac's Dance Hall. And they would perform there. So my dad was, I suppose, 16 years of age when he was playing with Mac's. And then as he got older, he got his own band and he went on the road and he'd play the Arcadia and he'd go to the Showboat in Youghal, or he'd go down to the Great Southern in Killarney, and so on and so on. And in 1957, sadly, he was working in the stone yard, and he was walking up the yard and he could see one of the headstones start to fall over like this. And instinctively, because there was a guy standing there, instinctively he put his hand out and the stone squashed his hand. So in one go, he lost his job as a stonemason and he couldn't play his music anymore. And they were going to amputate at the time, because that was and like, you didn't argue with the surgeon in 1957. If he says you're going to amputate, that's what you did. And my father said, no, as he said himself, it can wither off. You're not taking it. And eventually they did a lot of operations and skin grafts, and he got the use of his hand back, but he could never cut stone again, or he could never really play. He played the saxophone, but he was older then, and sadly the two careers gone just like that.
Jeepers, isn't it incredible? I didn't know that now, and that's an incredible thing. It's like it's like losing your voice as a singer. It's, what can you do?
Exactly.
And of course, then you were like myself. I went to boarding school for a brief period in Sacred Heart College, Carricknavar. So I was reading. You went to Rochestown, just up the road, but it might as well have been on Mars, as you said, going to boarding school.
Yes, yeah. The school, Rochestown School, was actually, you could measure it out. It was about 4.5 miles from my home. But at that time, in the 60s, you went in September, you got home at Christmas, you went back after Christmas, you got home briefly at Easter, and then you went back in, and then you were home after the summer exams.
Exactly.
There was no leaving the school whatsoever. You couldn't leave the grounds. And your parents could only come and see you on what was known as Call Sunday. And that was every second Sunday. And I remember the first time they were down, they didn't call on the Call Sunday. And I thought I was deserted for life. Because the great thing in our house when you were growing up, I've learned this with my own kids: never threaten them with the guards or with stuff like that, because it gives them a thing, And the big threat in our house was, you be a good boy or we'll send you to Greenmount. And Greenmount was an industrial school in Cork.
I know,
and I was terrified of going to Greenmount. And then when I was 12 and a half, suddenly I was sent to boarding school, and I'm going, what did I do wrong, man? I'm sorry. Right, so it really affected me in that way, I have to say.
And do you think that, I read where you said somewhere about that, all right, about your experience in later life, that some of the, I suppose, hang-ups or attitude you had as a young man stemmed from your experience in boarding school?
Yeah, no, I have to say, Pat, that it was a benign experience. I mean, there was no, like we hear of abuse in schools and things like that. It was a very benign regime in the Capuchins, and they're a lovely order.
I agree with you.
But it was the whole experience of being taken away from the family home and unable to literally go home 4.5 miles away. God, I'd walk it in 2 hours, you know what I mean? Or run it even in an hour. But so that had a big impact on me, I'd have to say.
And you, when you were growing up then, of course, at 14 or 15 or 16, most of us haven't a clue what we want to do. But I think, reading between the lines some little bits of information from you, Alf, that you always had an artistic lean on you. You had that side of thing that you were more, that was, I won't say obsessive now, that'd be the wrong word, but was more interested than anything else in your life.
Well, yeah, as a child, I loved going to the pictures. Right. Really, and the Savoy to me was the best cinema in the world ever. It was It was like we had loads of cinemas in Cork, but the Savoy in particular had glamour about it, and it was a magnificent cinema. And the beauty of it, and I didn't know this until years later. My dad would always bring us on a Saturday night, you know, and we all had turns to go to the pictures, and we'd go in, and he'd say, "Have a look down and see where Mr. Tracy is." Now, Mr. Tracy was our milkman from Ballinlough. And we'd say, "Oh, he's down the tunnel, Dad." So, okay, we go down. So we'd walk down the tunnel, and my father and Mr. Tracy would do this big pantomime of handing over tickets and tickets being torn up. We were getting in for nothing. And I never knew this. It was like, "Hiya, how's it going?" And we always got in for free. But it was lovely. But it like that instilled in me the idea of, I want to be a film star. Right. Because all my heroes are up on the big screen, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
But having said that, I was a very shy kid. I was extremely shy.
Yeah.
To the point of, oh God, if there's a condition called severe chronic shyness, I had it. You know what I mean?
Right. We'll have to look that up now. We'll have to look that up to see is there any help for that. But certainly, Alf, of course, Cork had a huge tradition with the Cork Film Festival, just massive in the 50s and 60s as well in Cork City.
Oh, it was. Yeah.
And so all those stars that, it was wonderful altogether. But anyway,
I remember seeing Jack Palance on stage at
the
Cork Festival. I mean, Jack Palance, larger than life.
Absolutely.
And he was being interviewed by the late Michael Toomey, you know, and Michael was very Cork and very formal. And Jack Palance was such the coolest dude you ever saw. And I was like, wow, one of my heroes up there, you know. Brilliant.
I can try to imagine Michael Toomey, all proper, and Jack.
Exactly, yeah. And he was like, "Well, tell me now, Mr. Palance," instead of saying, "Hiya, Jack, how's it going, boy?"
He should have, it was Bill O'Connell should have been interviewing him.
Perhaps.
But so your heroes are up on the silver screen, and how did you progress the idea then? Of course, I love the idea when you mentioned in one of the articles I was reading about American Forces Network, because that was the very first radio station I heard myself. My dad woke me up at 4:00 in the morning to listen to a boxing match between Emilio Johansson and Floyd Patterson.
Wow. Listen, you're singing from my hymn book, because my dad loved boxing. Yeah. And our hero in our house was Rocky Marciano.
Yeah.
And we tune into the American Forces Network to hear Rocky Marciano fight, you know, like he was the Great White Hope type of thing.
Yeah.
But also on the American Forces Network, we would hear things like Gunsmoke, which became, you know, there was a TV series, obviously a famous TV series.
There was.
Things like that. And the Lone Ranger, you know, hi ho, silver and away. And, I mean, when you think of that, you know, and we'd sit in the dark, like you'd have the glow from the fire. We had the radio was in the corner, and up in the corner of the radio was this little green dial, which gave you it showed you the strength of the signal.
It was luminous,
so you had this little green glow from the radio. You had the warmth of the fire, and we'd listen to things like from the BBC, things like Paul Temple or Dan Dare.
God,
you know,
I forgot
that was like, these were fantastic shows, you know. And when you listen to them now, like they were kind of very basic and very, I won't say crude, but they were very basic kind of shows. But to us at the time, it fueled the imagination big time. Well, for me in particular, you know.
Well, of course, with radio, you have to paint a picture yourself, you know, your own. You have to be creative in your head, so that helps the process. Oh, Casey Kasem, I used to have listened to on, I don't know what thing, that famous, what a name.
Casey Kasem, yeah.
What a name, the American Top 40. I don't know what station it was on, forgive me. But anyway, how did you progress then to fulfilling your dreams, I suppose, to coin a phrase?
Well, I emigrated to Canada. I had been working in Sunbeam Wolsey. It was my first job out of school as a trainee computer programmer. Myself and the guy who started with me were laid off because the recessions were starting to kick in Ireland big time. We emigrated to Canada, the two of us, and instead of going to someplace like Montreal or Toronto, one of the big cities, we went over to Alberta, to the Prairie State. Oh my God, talk about two idiots abroad, you know?
Alberta.
Totally unprepared. I mean, I should have just gone to London. Do you know what I mean? That would have been perfect.
I did that.
So I went to Edmonton, which is a big city in Alberta. There was no work. The day after I landed, it snowed, the start of the Canadian winter. I was wearing a little cotton pants. I was frozen by. And the only work I could get was selling encyclopedias. Now, can you imagine walking around selling encyclopedias in Canada?
In the snow.
With a great Cork accent. And not only that, but frozen to the bone.
Yeah.
And I used to, when I wash my hair, I never blow dry it or anything. I just leave it dry naturally.
Yeah.
So I'm walking around the streets of Edmonton and I'm getting this severe headache. Like my skin is really being pulled taut. Yeah. The hair was actually freezing on my head. I mean, I could have picked up pneumonia or something, you know. And as it turned out, the guy who went over with me, he got a job with the Hudson Bay Company, which was a live-in job, training assistant manager. He went. I couldn't afford to stay there anymore. I had a return ticket, so I came back to Ireland. But while I was there, you know, I had a good severe think to myself, and I said, I know what I want to do now. And what I wanted to do was to get into broadcasting, get into the disco scene in Cork, which I did. But the broadcasting trip took about, from the moment I decided this is what I want to do until I got my first gig, was about 10 years.
Go away. And
so like in the meantime, I did all sorts of other jobs.
And of course, I was reading about today, you did, as you said, honed your, for want of a better description, your broadcasting skills, doing DJing around. Of course, there was plenty of clubs in Cork at the time, plenty of places to do that. You know, you had the famous Highfield Rugby Club, which was...
I had a regular stint there, I was there for years,
The Shandon Boat Club, was it?
I played Shandon, the Black Rock Boat Club.
And who could forget Chandra's?
That's where I was for years. I was there for like a long time. You know, I was Mr. Weekend. So, but while I was doing the discos, I was also doing, you know, stage productions with the Everyman. I would do, I would host, you know, Glorious Housewives kind of thing, Rosa Tralee competitions, like any place where they needed an MC, I'd be there kind of
Cork Calor Housewife of the Year.
That's exactly what it was.
Calor course. Of course, you couldn't have one of them now. Would it not be correct not to have one of them now, Alf? What about
probably?
What about reviving?
Life has changed. Yeah, they would tell us that the woman's place is not in the kitchen. You know.
Oh.
And here's a lovely new cooker to go with it. You know. Isn't it amazing how things have changed in a few decades? You know.
It is, some sadly not so good, but anyway, they call that progress, Al, in some corners.
Yes,
Call it progress. But so then, of course, being in the clubs and the discos and that vibrancy and the energy that probably gave you thinking on your feet behind the mic, all those skills that you need, and communicating with a noisy audience. But how did your first gig come about on what we call the sedate, salubrious surroundings of RTE?
RTE had an opt-out service in the Cork studios, and the program was from the beginning called Cork About.
Cork About,
When it started out, it was a half an hour of local news from Cork. Then it developed to an hour. I had applied on a regular basis over years and years and years looking for a gig. And I eventually got it. Mark Cagney, who went on to TV3 and used to present the morning show there, was the presenter of Cork About at that time. And he used to do a gig on a Tuesday of new releases. So you'd get 3 or 4 records and you'd listen to them and you'd say, yeah, it's going to be a hit. But I was so bad at it. I mean, come on. I thought the Police were rubbish. They turned into the biggest sensations on the planet.
I know, yeah.
Little things like that. And quirky songs that I liked, you never heard of again, But I got on doing the new releases spot. And then Mark moved to Dublin to join 2FM, and he was doing what was it, the night shift? I think the show was called.
He was on at night, on 2FM.
Yeah, so he moved up to do that. He moved to Dublin permanently, and then there was a vacancy, and I was offered the vacancy, so I became the presenter of Cork About.
Well, I remember you on Cork About. I can't remember Mark Cagney, not anti-against Mark Cagney. I remember you on Cork About. Well, did you work with Stevie Bolger?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Where is he now? I know. One of life's gentlemen. I'm really fond of Steve.
Absolutely. Where is he now?
Well, as far as I know, he is living in Cork, in Ballavalan. He's got a house there. His son, who I always called his son Macaulay Culkin, because he was a little blonde fella. He looked like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. He's now apparently 6'6", and he's a Garda. A member of the force,
I remember when I met Stevie Bolger for the first time. We started the very first multi-denomination national school up in William Street, off McCurtain Street in Cork, and Stevie's little fella came in with my little daughter at the time. They're probably the same age now, and that's when I met Steve for the very first time, But I heard him on the radio anyway, He started off, he started off in pirate radio?
Yeah.
Did he? I think he did.
He did, yeah. He did, yeah. But again, he's another fellow who just loves radio and loves performing. He used to pop up on Christmas FM every year. I don't know whether you know this year or not.
That's where I heard them last.
Yeah.
Yeah, on Christmas FM. But yourself then, you were in Cork About.
So I'm so fond of Stevie. He's a lovely man.
Yeah, lovely man. You were in Cork About, Alf, for a long time then. And with Isabel Healy, was it? Was Isabel? I remember. Was she presenting with you?
Oh yeah. Well, when I was in the mid '80s, Dick Hill, who was the Assistant Director General of RTE, went for the big job, for the Director General job, and he didn't get it. So he left RTE and he moved back to Cork. He was from Cork originally. He lived down in West Cork, West Cork. And he became the general manager of the Cork Opera House at a time when the Opera House was in danger of closing literally every week.
Yeah,
it was going from week to week, and it could close at any moment because the economy was in dire straits. So Dick came down, and then he got involved with a company making television programs, and the very first program that they did was Down Here with a View to Above. The original title was Down Here, but Isabel Healy kind of threw in With a View to Above, and that became the title of the show. And basically, what you see on Nationwide now is what we were doing, but for a Munster region.
Yes.
So it became the blueprint in a sense for what Nationwide became. And it was Coco Television. They are very successful. They're still making loads of programs. But we were the very first program they did, and we did it for 4 seasons, and it was fabulous. I love doing it.
And there was a nice team on that. There's some lovely photographs from up there on as well, Alf. But you were, of course. Did you get to interview Michael Jackson that time when he came to Cork?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Pat?
Or did you get to meet Michael Jackson the time he came to Cork when he performed in Cork?
No, I actually didn't get to meet him, but we were doing an outside broadcast, Cork Local Radio, Cork About. We're doing an outside broadcast from Park Equive, and we were meeting the great and the good going in, people like BP Fallon and, whatever rock star happened to be drifting by, and the great unwashed,
That's right.
So
the ordinary people as well.
That's what we did there. But I didn't actually get to meet him. My very first interview on radio was actually James Last.
Oh, one of my fantastic heroes. I love jazz, of course, big band. Yeah.
Like the structure of Corkabout was that I was the presenter, and then I would introduce other people doing interviews. You know, somebody would be doing politics, somebody would be doing sport, and I would introduce them. But then as the show developed, I took on more and more interviewing, which was great. So eventually it became just me doing all the interviewing, basically. But the very first interview I did was with James Last. And I was very nervous because it was my first interview. He's a big, major international star.
Oh, yeah.
He was playing in the City Hall in Cork that night. And I went over and I had to wait in the big auditorium of the City Hall. And somebody went and got Mr. Last and he came out. Well, I tell you, he was so charming. He was a dream. And he obviously, and I actually said to him, I mean, he could have taken it as an insult to hear that they sent the Cub reporter his very first interview, you know, and I'm a big star, but he wasn't. He was so charming. And I said to him, look, this is my very first interview, Mr. Last. And he said, oh, that's grand, you know, and we did a lovely interview. So I was off and running with the interview stakes then after that, you know.
That's true. Of course, people from that era, James Last era, they have come up. They had served their time on the backwaters and the clubs and all, so they would have been appreciation, a different attitude. Not like some of the stars today who would have 5 or 6 big burly people around them and you can't get to see them at all, you know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Of course, James.
Like, I mean, he worked hard, you know, after the war years, he put up the big band and, you know, made big band music popular again, you know, and had a huge, one of my jobs before I joined RTE was I was running a record shop stroke a boutique in Oliver Plunkett Street in Cork. And the constant seller, one of the constant sellers was always James Last music. You know, like it wouldn't be the Paul McCartney and Wings, it wouldn't be the Beatles or David Bowie. They would sell, obviously, but the constant sellers were always James Last.
Yeah, fantastic. And he had fantastic musicians with him. Yeah, that's of course. Then that prompted there was a big wave of touring bands from the UK as well, like Sid Lawrence. I think Sid Lawrence played down the Arcadia and played around Majestic and Mallow. Yeah. Remember Sid Lawrence when they came and people like that. Our special guest this morning on LiR Confidential on LiRmedia.tv is the wonderful Alf McCarthy. Believe it or not, folks, he's not retired. For all of you listening to it, he is not retired. He's just taking it easier than he did before.
That's for sure. Yeah. Well, when I went to Ross Carberry, the first thing, I was here about a week and there was a knock on my door and there was a guy standing outside, and Dave Wright is his name, from Cork City, but now he's got a place down here. And he said, would you be interested in joining a men's shed? Now, if that had happened up in Cork City and somebody knocked on my door, I'd have given him a running jump, you know?
Yeah.
But it was down here, and I said, yeah, but I don't have any kind of skills that I think would fit into a men's shed. He said, not at all. He says, look, it's all about companionship. It's all about neighbors. And where I'm living, a 5-mile radius of here, the current members of the men's shed are all from. So instantly, I moved to West Cork and I met all my neighbors. So like, it was fantastic, you know? They've all been very friendly. Unfortunately, with the lockdown and COVID-19, we haven't been able to meet on a regular basis, but myself and Dave have been going down and cleaning out what was a cattle shed. And we've cleaned it up and taken stuff. And that's great. Like, you know, you're getting down, you're contributing to what's happening in the locality, and you're fitting in, which is lovely. And then I also then compile radio shows, which I put up on Mixcloud. I call them Later with Alf.
Yeah,
after late. Okay, it's going to be later.
Oh no,
so that's what I do.
I like them, Alf. I like those podcasts, you know. And
thank you.
What I like about it is, apart from the voice, you never lost the voice, thank God. Is that we go back up there, that honey-coated voice, as they describe different meanings. And I like your mix of music as well. It's not just, it's a nice mix of music, And
I've always been a great believer in the connectivity of music. And the idea that you can take maybe a piece of opera and a piece of country music and just fuse them. And it works, it doesn't have to be all country music, or I'm a real blues fan. So the blues, rock and roll, jazz, anything, comedy, I'm a great one for comedy. And I mix all that up. And basically I kind of say to myself, I like this mix. Yeah, this is good. I enjoy this. I hope other people will as well. And that's the way I kind of approach it, rather than looking for fame and fortune.
Exactly. There's a lovely variety to the thing, and that's Later with Alf, listeners, is the podcast, and we'll put a link up to on our show afterwards, because they're well worth to listen, particularly. And now your connection, you mentioned the surviving beautiful cinema and theatre. Also, I love the Everyman Theatre. Of course, Alf, you're an institution now in the Everyman Theatre. And we've seen my family, I have a sister living in Cork City. We've seen you many times. But I threw away all the notes I took in your performances. So we're starting afresh with you. But how did you get into the acting?
Again, it was a question of, how do I do this? And I knew there was a group in Cork called the Montforts, run by Eileen Nolan.
Yeah.
And I rang her and she said, sure, come along to one of her sessions, which I did. And I did a choral piece with them in the City Hall. They were singing and I just did a kind of a verse piece. The Everyman Theatre was up and running initially in Castle Street. And I used to go to the shows and be enthralled by it. And then just said to somebody someday, listen, lads, I'd love to get involved. And they said, yeah, sure, come along. Yeah. And it was as easy as that. So like with the early days in the Everyman, the CCYMS in Castle Street, and then they took over the Father Matthew Hall in Father Matthew Street by the Holy Trinity Church.
Yeah.
And that, oh God, that's a lovely theatre to play. It's very intimate. It's a very intimate theatre. So they were there for years and would have stayed there, except I think the Capuchins, we'll come back to the Capuchins again. They wanted to do bingo twice a week. They were doing it once a week. So if you do bingo twice a week, you're breaking the run of a play. So then the Everyman decided, look, we'll have to find another home. And then they did in the old Palace Cinema up in McCarthy Street. So now it's the Everyman Palace Theatre.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah. Of course, they're all gone now. The Palace Cinema is gone now, of course. It's a pity.
Oh, the Palace Cinema's gone. But occasionally, I think during film festival time, they screen movies there again,
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to put up a screen and what have you,
It is.
And technology is not as in the old days when you had the big projectors, and there were big, heavy projectors. I mean, I'd say they'd weigh a ton at least.
Yeah.
No, it's, you can stick up a computer. And run a film off that, and it's high quality digital imagery,
And
I loved, and I love also the intimacy of the Palace Theatre. It's the old Victorian boxes, the red
in McCarthy
of the colours of the seats and everything. It is just a lovely place to perform. I love going there.
And I always, during the Cork Jazz Festival, I always try and book 2 or 3 concerts that are on in the Everyman.
Yes, yeah.
It's just fantastic. You're not too far away, no matter where you're sitting, from the performance, which is fantastic. And you have a clear view of them as well, I don't have to tell you.
Yeah.
And so, can you remember the first full production you were in? You were given what we call a rather important role in.
Well, excuse me. When I was in school, they put on a school play called Mungo's Mansion by Walter Mackin, and that was the very first play I was in. as a kid, I used to put on shows in my garage and charge a penny to come in. And we'd stand, myself and my friend would stand. He'd have a tennis racket because he was a better player than I was. Yeah. And I'd have a hurley. And we'd be strumming away like mad, doing the shadows, you know, dang, 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 dang. And we'd charge a penny for that. We got our money. So, but with the Everyman, I think the very first production I would have been in was Passion Play. And I played a centurion in that. And it was a tale of the Christ. And it obviously went on at kind of Easter time. And then when they moved then to Father Matthew Hall, the very first big production I was in, I played Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire, the part that Marlon Brando made for us. And that was such a powerful play. It was directed by the late Mick McCarthy. He only passed away a few weeks ago.
Oh, God, yeah.
But he was a man of great passion and a fine actor, but a superb director. And that to me was my big test, in a sense. And I felt I got through that fairly well. And I said to myself, yeah, you can do this. Yeah, you're able to, you know, do a show as big as this and as important as this. So in a sense, that was the first big one, you know.
Well, A Streetcar Named Desire, of course, it as you said, it was a huge risk in one way because people will always revert back to Brando and the film. You can't compare a film with the play, but nevertheless they're familiar with the character. So, I mean, that was a huge, for you personally, Alf, that was a big challenge.
Oh, it was, yeah. And Brando had also played it on Broadway, on stage. Yeah. So, like, he came from the success of that with glowing reviews, and they put him in the film then.
Yeah.
And like it made him a huge star.
He was
so like a lot of no pressure, no pressure, boy. But I wanted to do the best I could, and it's the play is set in New Orleans. And I remember one night a couple coming up to me at the end of the show, and they said, "We're from New Orleans," and I said, "Really?" And I'm going, "Oh my God, I hope I did just." And they said, "You nailed the accent perfectly." And I was so chuffed with that. And it was almost by osmosis, and rather than me knowing how they speak in New Orleans, you know. But it was like as the play was progressing, you kind of hear the nuance of the script by Tennessee Williams, and also the lady I was playing opposite, Rosemary Archer, lovely actress. She played Blanche Dubois. So we had a lovely, it really worked, you know, kind of a production that meshed in nicely.
Yeah.
So I was absolutely thrilled when they said that to me. And I said, "Oh, great. At least I didn't make a dog's dinner of it, you know?"
That's right, yeah. That's all you'd hope for anyway. Now, when did Michael become involved in Michael Toomey? When did he become involved in the Everyman? Was he there for a while, Michael Toomey himself?
Well, you see, Michael was on the Cork scene for so many years. As a young actor, would have been involved with Theatre of the South, which premiered all of the John B. Keane plays.
All right.
You know, Many Young Men of 25, and Michael would have been part of all of that. He was also a very fine adjudicator of on the circuit, the amateur drama circuit.
Yeah.
He was involved with the Everyman. He would then be involved with the pantomimes in the Opera House. There was a series called Summer Revels, which was, if you like, a summer pantomime.
Oh, just
Michael was involved in that as a director. He was a film actor. He was a television actor. You know, he did it all. And like he would have been one of, you know, the people you try to emulate, you know, because he went before and broke new ground and things like that, you know.
Yeah, and
I worked with Michael on stage a few times. He directed me in a couple of plays, and we also played. I did 12 Angry Men, which is also another powerful play.
Oh.
And Michael was in that as well, so it was lovely to share the stage with him.
Yeah.
So then we Linda Kenny, who wrote that article that you referred to earlier,
Yeah.
she was involved with Michael and Cathal McCabe and Damien Smith for years, putting on shows in the Everyman. And then sadly, Michael got very unwell. I was in a production called Jack, which was about Jack Lynch, written by Declan Hassett, directed by Pat Talbot, and we were on it in the Everyman Theatre. And the weekend we finished, that Sunday, the Everyman Palace shows that Linda and Michael and all the gang were involved in was coming up. And Linda contacted me and she said, Alf, would you mind being on standby? Because Michael is quite unwell and we're not sure if he'd be able to perform. I said, of course, yeah. But as it turned out, Michael said to Linda, no, I've got to do this one. And he did it. And sadly, oh, God bless the man. It took great courage and great strength to do that show. And he passed away shortly after that. And when he did pass away, Linda came back to me and said, would you like to join our group? And so I became part of the Sunday night at the Everyman group. And then we expanded that out to what we call the Great Sing-Along Songbook.
Yeah.
And we've been taking it around the country. We were up in National Concert Hall, the Civic in Tala, Theatre Royal in Waterford, up in Bantier. And last year then, we were expanding even further. We were going to Shimsatir and Tralee. We were looking at the north. We were looking at Britain. And then, of course, the lockdown came and COVID came. And that put
of course, when
the kibosh on all our plans.
Exactly, Alf. And when we get up running again, he'll have to come down to the lime tree in Limerick, and he'll have to come down to the bell table in Limerick with that songbook, because it's just, you can't see it anywhere. It's fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah. So like we've been exploring new venues, and saying we've got to go. Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah.
That'll be marvelous altogether. Our special guest today on LiR Confidential is the legendary broadcaster, actor, and encyclopedia seller, and everything else, Alf McCarthy. We're delighted to have in the studio. Alf, tell me, I know we're jumping around. Were you a soccer follower? Were you a sports follower, a big sports follower in Cork?
Again, I suppose it goes back to the radio. I mentioned Rocky Marciano. The other thing we used to listen to, and because we lived in Ballinlough, were particularly if Cork were playing, down the park, down the marina, and to hear Christy Ring being described in glowing terms as a gladiator of all times was a great sense of pride. So grew up listening to that. Picture Park, before they built on it, was a greenfield site, and it was the site where Fordsons, who were that was the soccer team involved with Henry Ford and Sons.
That's right, yeah.
And they were called Fordsons. They used to. Their pitch was up in where Picture Park is, and their colours were green and white. So when Fordsons went, then Cork Athletic came along. And they were green and white, and then following Cork Athletic, we used to go to the Mardyke. My dad would bring us out to cheer on Cork Athletic, and then Cork Hibernians were out in Flower Lodge. I would have been a soccer follower, and it would have been the Cork teams,
And Cork Hibernians, of course, were just superb. I mean, we used to go up there, and Cork Celtic, they had two good, strong soccer teams in Cork at the time, Cork Celtic and Cork Hibs.
They were.
But we didn't mind because we saw them every second Sunday, whether you went to the cross or
that's right. Yeah.
It didn't matter. You were every Sunday.
Go to the box on Turner's Cross on one Sunday, and then out Flower Lodge on the.
That's right. I was in the army at the time for my sins, and Joe Grady was the goalkeeper for Cork Hibs.
Yes,
Big Joe. God, are we showing our age? But
I think so. Yeah, but sure, why not?
Yeah, and you, as you said, you moved down to Rosscarbery, just going back to where you are today, Alf. And how are things today? I know we're grappling, I know I am myself, with this lockdown and this challenge that we have as human beings, because we are sociable animals. And the restrictions put on us is a huge challenge, I think,
Oh, yeah, big time. I just love this area. Where I am, as I was saying to you, I'm halfway up a hill. Now, if I go out the door and just look to the left, I can see the sea beyond. I can see Galley head off to one side, and then on the other side it's heading off down to Union Hall and what have you.
Yeah.
So that's my view from where I'm living, and that's so uplifting.
Yeah.
Where I'm also situated, like if I take a right, I'm heading for Skibbereen and maybe down to Bantry. Take a slight left and then a right, and you're going down to Baltimore. Go down to Glandore, Union Hall, or if I go the other way, Onahincha Beach is just around the corner from me, and then you're heading for Clonakilty, and it's just a most beautiful part of the country, and I love it.
Yeah.
And also the area is steeped in history and it's steeped in folklore. And where I'm living on the hill, as you come down the hill, there's a ring fort.
Yeah.
And I every now and again I stop and I just go in and just stand there. It's surrounded by trees. It's one of the most. It's almost like going into a church. You know how some people will go into a church and sit quietly, and this has the same effect because it's like pure solitude. It's lovely.
Yeah,
and that's all here in this area.
So you get the same feeling as you would to go to any, I suppose, place of spirituality, for the want of a better description.
Yeah.
Are you a spiritual?
Yes, yeah,
are you a spiritual person?
I wouldn't be a religious person, but I would think I'm a spiritual person, and I believe because of what I've done for a living, I'm fairly good when I meet people to get a sense of who they are just by talking to them.
Right.
And I do love, and even more so now, the kind of simple things of life. And one of the great pleasures for me is the wonderful gift that young children have. And that's to see the world as they see it. There are no influences of any shape or form, no prejudices, and they'll tell it like it is. Like I have 7 grandchildren, and the youngest guy now, and there's a young guy and there's a young girl, and they just tell you the way it is. And I just love that. I think that's fantastic, you know. I remember one time calling to a friend's house. I called to a friend's house one night, and actually he was fixing my car. That's what it was. He used to service my car on a regular basis. And his daughter was there, and she was the prettiest little girl now you've ever seen. She had a lovely dress on, and she had lovely long hair. And we were chatting away, and it was like very basic, you know. And how are you? And you good girl? And do you like school? Yeah. And then I said to her, you know, I love your hair. And she looked at me like that. And I said, did you knit that yourself? And she said, no. And then there was a pause, and she looked at my hair, which is like very thin, and she says, you could knit some for yourself. And her mother was so embarrassed, you know. Yeah. And I thought this was just perfect. You know, it was the lovely logical conclusion. It was honest. It wasn't hurtful or anything. It was, and that's what I love about young children, you know.
Young kids are great because, I mean, I have grandkids myself, and they do keep, I mean, people don't really know sometimes what we're talking about until you have grandkids of your own. And I really, really look forward to meeting them all the time, but not so frequent now, unfortunately. 2 of mine are up in Dundalk. I meet them by Zoom, but they were down for Christmas. But anyway, you know the way you'd have an old jumper that you wear around the house. It's one thread, but it's your jumper. It's just comforting, really. And it's shabby, really.
Yeah.
Granddaughter says to me the very first time she came in to visit me. I live on my own now, of course. But she said, Granddad, what are you doing? There's all holes in that, you know? She said, turned to her dad and said, have you any money, Dad, to give to Granddad?
Brilliant.
I mean, it's so simple, but you have to be there. I mean, the seriousness of it. I mean, this was urgent, you know, for the grandchild.
Yes,
It wasn't urgent for Granddad. He couldn't care less. Like, but you're right.
Isn't that lovely?
I think it's another chapter in our respective lives, because, as I said, you don't know until it happens to you. Grandkids gives you a different zest for life again. It renews your faith in living and in humanity. I know it's so very grandiose, but I believe that.
Yeah. And I know myself, I have two girls who are now obviously grown up women. But when they were small, I was working 7 days a week. I was running a pizza place in Cork called Pizza Land. And I was running that for 4 years. At the same time, I was doing my disco at Patrick Street. Yeah. You had Burgerland on the corner. It was the old Victoria Hotel building.
Yeah,
so
I remember
Burgerland,
I remember
the entrance to the Victoria, and then you had us.
It's love Pizza Land, yeah.
So we were there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was working there, and it was like I was working in there for like 6 days a week, plus doing the discos at night. So I was constantly tired, and my little girls were small. And I remember one time going to pick up my little one, the youngest one, and she kind of backed away from me, which like ripped my heart out. And I realized that in a sense I was a stranger to her, because she would be sleeping. And I'd come home late, and I would sleep late, maybe, or whatever it was. So, like, we weren't connecting, and that like tore the heart out of me. Whereas with your grandkids,
I was lucky when my kids were small.
You do have that joy of.
Oh, absolutely! And I was lucky when my kids were small, and that I was working.
Yeah.
I had a taxi at the time, so I just worked nights, and I was there by day. So they saw me a lot, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know what to think of me now, but
yeah.
It was grand when they were young. But as I said, years can go by and you don't notice it after yourself when it's gone. But I know, do you remember when you're in Cork local radio? Do you remember the huge upsurge in basketball in Cork? When there was a huge excitement.
I do indeed, yeah.
Do you remember Team Britvic and Neptune and all of that? And I remember, as you mentioned, Burgerland, Team Burgerland was another one of them, was the wonderful going up to the parochial hall to see Jasper McElroy playing. Do you remember Jasper McElroy?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I do indeed, yeah.
God, that...
Well, in fact, the manager of Burgerland at the time was a guy called Jackie Solon. And we both kind of started, me and Pizza and him and Burgerland at the same time, but he went on because they had more promotions going, and he would have been very much part and parcel of promoting the team.
Yeah.
So so very much aware of that, you know.
God, the place used to be packed. I remember seeing B.B. King in Neptune Stadium. He played there, B.B. King, the wonderful B.B. King. He came to play a concert in the Neptune Stadium. I think it was back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s it was. He played there. So my friend got a ticket for it. I couldn't imagine. I was living in Cork. I couldn't get a ticket. My friend down in Tralee got a ticket for me for the gig, which is funny, you know. Now, if you were sent out to the top of the hill now in the morning all by yourself, and you had to bring 6 or 7 records or tunes or pieces of music with you. I know I didn't warn you of this now coming up, but I know you can whir away in your head. If you had 6 or 7 pieces of music or artists you'd bring with you, just in your solitude, what would they be? Some of them. What would they be? What's your go?
Okay. Well, there's a song I want played at my funeral, and I'm making out my list now as we speak. There's a song by Fairport Convention featuring the wonderful Sandy Denny. Beautiful, clear voice. And who knows where the time goes. That's one particular song that I do.
When you mentioned Sandy Denny, I knew you were going to pick that song. She was so sad that she died so young.
Yes, she was. God bless her. Yeah.
But that song, when you hear that song, you're dead right, Alf. I don't know, there's goose pimples, you know, you just
exactly
you stop when you hear those stoppers, you know, showstoppers, so to speak. Which beautiful voice, Sandy Denny, and she
did,
God, that'd be certainly. We're on the same page there, anyway. And what else would you would you bring along?
I've always been a great fan of Paul Simon and Simon & Garfunkel. Because I used to get the early albums, and I would lie in the floor in the front room with my head up to the speaker, and I had a terrible old record player. I mean, it was rubbish. You know, it wasn't stereo or anything, but it was like a box with a little speaker in it. But, and there's a song that when Simon and Garfunkel broke up, they both brought out solo albums. And both of them had the same track on their solo albums because it was called My Little Town. And I've always liked that particular song because for some reason it kind of reminded me of Cork. And there's a line in it, in My Little Town, God keeps his eye on us all. And we used to have a picture of Jesus up on the wall, and the eyes would follow you around the room. And that used to scare the hell out of me. So listening to the song was, it's not that the colors aren't there. You talk about a rainbow. It's not that the colors aren't there. It's just that they're all black. So it had to do with the attitude of people in the city at the time. So I've always liked that particular song. Really deep down, like, and anything bluesy, you know.
Right.
John Lee Hooker doing one scotch, one bourbon, one beer. Thank you very much.
Right.
I just love that. You know.
All right, yeah. You know that you said it, John Lee Hooker. Go ahead and play him for a while now. He's fantastic, John Lee Hooker, and Simon Garfunkel, and Sandy Denny. Of course, then, would you have anything more contemporary yourself that you admire today?
Well, I'm constantly there was when I was in the disco scene, I'd be listening to the charts all the time. Yeah. But I've stopped doing that. Yeah. I find it very difficult to listen to radio now because I end up screaming at the radio saying, you know, because I do believe standards have fallen dramatically. The news in particular, I think, oh my God. Its speech patterns have changed, you know, what I call the transmigration of vowels.
Right.
Like where there was an E, there's now an A, and things like that, you know. It's the way people pronounce words. It's the way they read scripts, with emphasis on every second word. They stop mid-sentence instead of going through, you know, after the verb, you have the action.
Yeah.
And like people are reading scripts, and it's like I get the impression they don't even know what they're reading, and I find that very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you because I listen to a lot of radio still, but it's not real. I'm not knocking our own. There are some fine programs across the channels, across the stations in Ireland, but as a constant, I dip into across the UK, I dip into American radio, or the offbeat ones that I come across, you know.
Yeah.
And I think most of the music stations in Ireland are very formalistic.
Yeah.
They seem to be run by a computer with a human voice going in.
Yeah. Playlists are made, and
you remember going in. You remember going with your bag of 45s or your bag of CDs, you know. You remember that. That's why I stuck. That's why not that I get a job anywhere, but that's why I loved community radio. You were giving your show. It was your show. You were 100% responsible for it. You could bring in your own music and play. Hopefully, there'll be a reaction to it, and you could talk a little bit. Give me time, space, to talk a little bit about the artist and who was playing in it. But as you said, that's not even done now. The playlist is there. The playlist is there, and half the piece of music you're expected to play, you're supposed to be, I suppose, be enthusiastic about some of the absolute nonsense you're playing on air. I think it must be a huge challenge, Alf, you know?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of music today is like almost like a computer program in that they find a formula and then it's all computer based. I used to do discos in the 70s and the 80s, and the 80s in particular. I don't have a great love for the music of the 80s. A, because I was up every night playing them, but also there was a lot of synthesizer in it. And I'm a great one for having real instruments in there. Exactly. And I often wondered, like, people and groups that I kind of like Eurythmics, for example, if they would ever go back and just re-record with full instruments as opposed to a computer.
Right. Yeah.
So, like from that point of view, I do like to gravitate back to good old solid sound.
Yeah.
You know,
like trogs, like
not
animals.
digital, but go back
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
analog. You know, go back to that. And
Well, you're right. Go back to the
and that music kind of hits you in solar plexus. You know.
yeah, I think that the X Factor and some of those have ruined the music industry in many ways. Now, there are many fine singers out of it. I mean, I particularly love Shane Ward. I think he's a marvelous singer. I adore Shane Ward. He was in that one of those programs, but he can put his hand to anything. I love him singing. But going back to yourself, what's under, of course, now with so many places closed down, Alf, and the country in lockdown, how do you find it? How do you find, I know, we started this business, just to let you know, in January of last year, and we were locked down in March. You can imagine the challenge. But at least we have somewhere to go every day, you know? We have some purpose, you know, something to do.
Yeah.
And what about yourself? How do you spend your days yourself now? Is it a challenge?
Well, I've always lived within my own head in many ways, you know. So like the day to me is fine. I'll get up, like I have some writing that I want to do. I've been working on scripts, short stories. I wrote a short story about my dad the day he died, and I sent it up to RT. They have a competition every year. Didn't win anything of it, but I was really pleased with that particular one.
And when did your dad pass?
Sorry, say that again, Pat.
When did your dad pass away, Alf?
Sorry, the sound just kind of went there again. You might.
That's okay. When did your dad pass away?
Oh, my dad passed away. Buddy passed away in the mid-90s, and he died in his sleep. He every day he'd go out for his pint. You know, he had his pint at lunchtime. He'd come home, and then himself and my mum would go out for a glass of Guinness in the evening, and that was their life, really. You know.
Right.
And then one day he came home and he says, "I'm going to go up and lie down for a while." And she went up to wake him as she usually did. So they'd go for their glass of Guinness. And he says, I don't feel too well. And then she rang me the following morning. He had died in his sleep. So,
oh, dear.
For a man who kind of lived on the edge, like at a time where traveling the highways and byways of Ireland and drinking was no problem, you know, it was the norm. For him to die in his sleep, I just could not get over that. But it did affect me deeply, I have to say.
Well, I lost my
the story has been in my head for a long time, and eventually I got it down on paper. So I was delighted with that.
Yeah, and I lost my own mum at the end of November. She was 91. She was a good age in a nursing home, which was like being in prison with severe dementia. She was a prisoner, in my view, anyway, the way the system locked her up. But anyway, but she had a good life. My own dad is still knocking around him. He'll be 91 now soon, my own dad. So thankfully he's not too bad.
That is fantastic.
So I said to my grandsons,
oh, that's brilliant,
and my own family, I'm going to be around for another 30 years, so you have to get used to me. You know?
And they're going, no, don't wear that cardigan, Dad.
There's no God. There's no God there. There's no God. I don't believe in God anymore. But that short story, how long is that short story, Alf, that you wrote about your dad?
Oh, it's about 2 pages long. You know, like it's not an epic. And I'm in the middle of writing one now when I went to boarding school. So like it's almost like a companion piece. So I want to finish that one off.
And you don't have the little story there, no? But John,
I'm afraid I don't.
That's all right. I'll tell you, we'll come back. We'll come back for a part 2. If that's all right, too, in a couple of weeks' time, and we might go through some of that. You know, it'd be great.
Oh yeah, sure, of course, yeah. I'd be delighted to.
You know something? We've gone past an hour, which is fantastic, and really, I don't know how much you think yourself of these things, but there's a lot of love around for you. When I told my friends, there's a lot of respect around for you. When I told my friends who I was interviewing today, every single one of them said, I see all one friend, every single one of them said, late date, Mr. Late Date.
That's right.
Straight away, immediately. I don't know what it was, because I was traveling on the road myself, doing a job that time, and I'm trying to make ends meet. And I remember yourself on Late Date. But it's been an absolute joy on our part here at Alf in LiR Media and LiR Confidential to speak with you. And no doubt we'll catch up with you again. We won't let you off the hook. We'll catch up with you again in a few weeks' time if you have time to give us, you know.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
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 And we'll send you the copy of this.
Just want to say goodbye from the two boys. My heroes, Laurel and Hardy. So when I moved in here, I've had these two guys for years. But when I moved in here, the first thing I didn't have a holy picture, but I had the two boys, and I put a nightlight in front of them, so I was there. I was grand.
And
a bag of potatoes.
Where did you get that? Where did you get those?
It was actually one of my daughters bought it for me. She saw it in a bric-a-brac shop, I think it was.
Oh,
but I love Laurel and Hardy. I think
I never get tired of looking. They were geniuses, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah. And actually, the year I retired, when I was 65, my partner Sharon took us to a special screening of a Laurel and Hardy double bill, and it was perfect. I loved it. It was the one, the famous one where they deliver the piano.
Oh God!
And they're trying to get it up the hill.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, it was magical. So it was like the best birthday present ever. And it's like what the cinemas kind of do now is that they all link up and they broadcast the same thing at the same time. So you book tickets for this. Sadly, now with the lockdown, we can't do it for a while, but they do it with opera and they do it with stage productions.
That's right.
They did it with Laurel and Hardy. So I was delighted. The boys trying to get that piano up that hill.
And the simple, I know it's a simple comedy one way, but it was real comedy, you know. You'd be there yourself with them. Would you know, you'd be there yourself pushing the piano.
You know, and it's like, you know the punchline, you know what the joke is.
Yeah.
But their timing was so perfect. It was the nod of the head, and it was and then with Oliver Hardy looking directly at the camera as if to say, you know, this guy, what? I just love them. They were brilliant. Anyway, Laurel and Hardy, my two lads.
Laurel and Hardy, we've forgotten about it. We could cover that next time anyway, Alf. And as I said, from this edition of LiR Confidential on LiR Media, Alf McCarthy, it's been a wonderful pleasure to speak to you and take time out of your day to be with us. And until we meet again, and we surely will, good day and God bless you, Alf.
Thank you, Pat. A pleasure.
Now I come.